Welcome to the Berean Remnant. I'm your host, Dr. Bernard Mauser, and today we're going to be discussing Labor Day. For a lot of the history of America, what we know is that the Industrial Revolution really helped America gain both wealth and prosperity. The more economic freedom there was in different countries, you end up seeing more prosperity. So this was consonant with what Max Weber called a Judeo-Christian work ethic. And based in the Proverbs, we see that there consistently is a connection between work and wealth. For example, the hand of the diligent will rule, but laziness ends in forced labor. Of course, there's also the Christian New Testament, which says the person who's unwilling to work will not eat. So you have this reaffirmed throughout Scripture again and again about all the benefits that come from your labor. Now, growing up, I'm sure a lot of us have fond memories of Labor Day, having picnics, playing games with friends, maybe swimming, having a day off, a paid holiday when we were older. And if you look up online the history of Labor Day, the majority of the websites will connect Labor Day with labor unions. And so what I want to do on this Labor Day is debunk the myth that labor unions gave us all these good things that they claim to have given us. So there's three common myths. One of them is that labor unions help get rid of child labor. A second is that labor unions are the things that were primarily responsible for improving the working conditions. And the third is that labor unions are really great for the common man. So let's look at each of these in turn. The first one is that labor unions help get rid of child labor. And we know and we've heard of sob stories of children working in factories in early America and Britain. And there's still children working around the world today. But it's not labor unions that caused people to abolish child labor. As a matter of fact, when a lot of these industrialized nations became wealthier, parents stopped sending their kids to the factories. And what happens in third world countries when we in the first world say, we're not going to buy your product unless you get rid of the children working in the factories making these products, it's not that children stop working. They go to an alternative working source. They do alternative work where it's significantly more dangerous, more hazardous, and they pay less money. So parents send their kids to work because they see it as the best viable alternative. And a lot of times they're choosing between starvation and non-starvation. So, hey, if we don't want to starve, then we're sending our kid to work. If we're going to die, we won't make them work. But hey, at least you won't be working, but nobody else is going to eat. What it ends up happening is when these kids don't work in the factory where they're paid more and it's safer, though it may appear compared to a first world conditions to be terrible working conditions, they're driven to either human trafficking or to farms, which are a lot more hazardous, a lot less pay. A parent loves his kids way more than labor unions, way more than governments. So generally, we love our kids way more than anyone else. There's a reason we get our kids to work. A second myth is that labor unions helped improve the working conditions. And actually, this is, again, a result of the Industrial Revolution, economic development. When the society got wealthier, as you're competing for jobs, if you had to choose between a cushy job where you're making $10 an hour and it's really comfortable working conditions, or a job that is extremely strenuous but maybe $50 an hour and not cushy at all, if we had the choice, there are many in our society who would choose $50 an hour to not have a cushy job versus $10 an hour in a cushy job. So what ends up happening in a labor market is, and especially one that's free and not having the government force you to do things, is employers are competing for workers. So I want the best workers coming to me. I'm going to give high rates of pay and I'm going to try to make the environment as comfortable as possible. If I can't both give high rates of pay and make it as comfortable as possible, I have to choose, because I'm the one who's doling out the money to make their workers' condition more comfortable. So often you can't have both, but if you can, that's great. That's what ends up happening in the market. And you'll draw laborers to you depending on what you can offer as an employer. But the employer has to pay to offer those comfortable things. And what ends up taking a hit as a result? A lot of times the salary. So you're earning less. So the very thing that led to better conditions for employees was the fact that the overall amount of wealth increased. The third myth is that labor unions really support the working man. They're for the common man. And I know this is a common myth because I've heard it all my life growing up in a very blue-collar, very pro-union part of Ohio where I grew up. I had a lot of people I loved who were part of unions, and they talked about, hey, we make higher wages because of the union. What they don't realize, and this is one of the principles of economics, that you have to look not only on what is seen, you're seeing the higher salaries. What they're forgetting about is what is unseen. And there's a couple economists from Ohio University, Richard Vader and Lowell Galloway. They calculated what was the economic impact over a 50-year period of time of labor unions in the United States. And what they found out is that the American economy is $50 trillion smaller than it would have been. So with the American economy, think of it as a pie that is growing. So there's things that existed or that exist today that didn't exist even 10 years ago. So think of all the inventions that have been on the market that you can access today that weren't around when you were born or when your children were born, for those of you that are parents. So when I was a child, there was no personal computers anywhere in the US. Now we're all carrying around computers in our pockets. So the economic pie has grown. The economic pie would be $50 trillion larger. I think we have a hard time wrapping our mind around how big that is. So we could all imagine spending maybe $1 million a day. Let's take it $1 million a day. How long would it take to spend $1 trillion if you spent $1 million a day? And what you would find is that it would take to spend $1 trillion 2,740 years to spend $1 million a day and reach $1 trillion. Now let's multiply that. If I was spending $1 million a day, how long would it take me to spend $50 trillion? It would take me 137,000 years to spend $50 trillion. That's the labor market that we could be living in if it wasn't for the union. So these are some things to realize. It's not that the unions have helped us, they've actually hindered us. The primary people, if you read the union leaders throughout history, the primary people they're targeting are minorities. So in the late 1800s, it was primarily the Chinese and the railroads. They were trying to keep the Chinese out of the railroads from being firemen. The blacks in the early 1900s, and then the Mexican Americans as the 20th century progressed. These were the ones who were most hard hit as a result of laws that unions, basically when colluding with the federal government, they had them put these things in place, and it kept them out of occupations that white workers were holding. So it was not beneficial to minorities, but also it wasn't beneficial to people in unions either. They don't realize how much more wealth they could have had. And there's a lot of reasons for that, beyond just excluding certain people from the market. People move every year from unionized states to right-to-work states. And so there's a huge cost of doing that. You have the cost of products being more money than they would have been. You have cost of people not being employed because I have to pay higher union wages. So what I could have made, a lot of that is unrealized, unseen, because all you're seeing as a union worker is oh, I'm getting this higher wage. You're not seeing what could have been. And that's one of the things that these economists reveal in their study. So I hope you realize that we are having tremendous blessings just by being in America, living off the fruits of the labor of the generations before us. We can enjoy this Labor Day holiday, but let's not buy into all the labor union myths that are commonly associated with this holiday. So, Bereans, I hope you continue to study the Word daily, see whether what I'm saying corresponds to reality and Scripture. And if you like this content, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment below for anything you'd like me to talk about. Have a great day.